Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Rose City Politics. It is December the 1st or the fourth night of Hanukkah. If you are celebrating, I hope that all of you on the panel tonight have fried latkes or whatever you do to make the miracle of the oil last for all 8 nights. Our regular panel tonight includes Doug Sartori. Doug, how's your oil situation?
It's a very personal question. It's fine.
Glad to hear that. We have Don Merrifield. How are you, Don?
I am always well lubed and ready to go.
I hope it lasts for at least another 4 nights.
A boy can dream, right?
I was so disappointed as I started to say it, but you have to follow through. We also, though, have a guest panelist tonight, Ward 3 Councillor Rino Bortolin. Rino, how are you?
Good. No comments on the oil.
Have you ever made latkes yourself?
No, I have not.
See, I would love to try latkes that you make. That's
you were going to offer to make them for me instead. It's like, I would love to eat the ones you make for me.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to make them for you. I'm not a chef. You are. You're the chef.
You should really try them, Reno. Make them for all of us.
I think you could pull it off really well, but they're a nice, tasty treat. Anyways, we'll get into that in the after show or after the conversation at least. But if you are a Patreon subscriber, thank you so much. If not, head to patreon.com/Rose City Politics. It is what makes this train keep churning down the track. We are also in BizX Magazine, and on bizxmagazine.com, we have a column that is coming out in the January issue. Not going to tell you what it's about, but it's a good one. You're going to want to read it. And Rose City Politics has been able to broadcast live on tape thanks to the kind support of Leuna 625, Building Better Communities. And we do want to give a shout out to Hannah Ruth, who posted their Spotify year-end playlist bravely, publicly on Twitter. And it showed that Rose City Politics was the #1 played track that there was. I don't know if it was in the podcast category or if it was just broadly the #1. Either way,
second place was the New York Times, so screw you, New York Times.
Yeah, I saw that Hannah had 1,620 or so minutes listened over the year, which is works out to roughly 30 minutes per episode. So on the one hand, Hannah, I want to know what happened to the other 30 minutes. But on the other hand, I honestly, that's probably more time than I spend listening
100%
in every show. So good for you.
Listen, the good stuff is either like right in the front half or you've missed out on it because it's in the last 10 minutes. But here's what I want to say to Michael Barbaro. This is John Lidke of Rose City Politics. You suck. I'm signing off.
I don't
John
know
Lidke now. Yeah, Michael Barbaro. He's pretty good. It's a good podcast. You should check it out after the hard drag.
He sounds like Christopher Walken to me. So.
Oh wow, 1, 2. Anyways, let's get to the topics. We are
John's
going to
impressions are usually a second half of the show thing.
It usually is. Yeah.
Diving right into it. Well, I mean, Don asked.
We call them the post Hannah minutes now.
There we go. We have Councillor Bortolin here, and we're going to be diving straight into talking about transit, and we're really excited about that because there's been so many different articles and stories that have come out over the past couple of days about transit, different takes about it. Councillor Bortolin and I actually had a pretty good private back and forth about one of the issues that I'm looking forward to speaking with him about. He put me in my place and told me that I was wrong and that he was right on an issue, and it wasn't in a bad way at all. I actually did appreciate learning a different perspective on it. After transit, we will be talking about a significant increase in the homelessness population here in Windsor, Essex, also with a disproportionate amount of them found to be Indigenous peoples living here. And then we will be talking about a councillor call for a 0% tax increase. You can guess who that is, but we will dive in right now to transit. Councillor Bortolin, I want to set this up for you. We usually try to craft a good outline for what we're going to talk about with the show and how we're going to dive in with guests. But I've interviewed you before, and you are one of the great interviewees where you can ask one question and you're just going to answer all 5 to 6 questions that there may be. So I didn't write down all 5 to 6 questions or break that down. We've got some secondary questions that we'll get to, but I really do just want to tee this one up for you in the sense of we're looking right now, obviously moving into the budget, and we have seen the committee that oversees transit seeking a budgetary increase. We've seen a bit of a debate between you and the mayor indirectly on social media about what the increase to Transit Windsor in the budget is being identified as a subsidy on the one side, but yet an expansion potentially, whereas you're saying on the other side, this is just a fuel and labor cost. We're also looking, though, as you and I have discussed, at 2 times tunnel bus increases. I'm wondering, what is the state of our transit right now? And you're going to be getting a peppering in of questions from the 3 of us as we go through, because it's probably a lot easier for us to just have a dialogue and a conversation about this than try to just go, back and forth one-on-one. So like, where are we at with it moving into this budget from your perspective?
Well, I mean, there's 2 parallel things that you have to consider. There's transit as far as long-term investments and plans, and then there's COVID reality. So COVID definitely has us down. Our ridership is down 50%. We're right now running on a reduced Saturday schedule because of lack of employees, because of our vax mandate. So issues tied to COVID has sort of put our ridership down and put our levels of service down. Long-term wise, Transit Windsor had gone through a great master plan and a development of a master plan a couple of years ago, passed in 19. That plan, probably one of the best that I've ever seen as far as public engagement, using of data, statistics, all the engagement to see which routes could be added. There was a lot of great things that came out of that engagement, and the master plan is actually a fantastic document. So part of that master plan was to start introducing new routes, specifically routes that are ones considered spines, or this one, for example, the 418X that we're looking at for this year. It goes from Tecumseh Mall until the West End terminal, and so this will be a spine for all new north-south routes as well. So this is the one that's the contentious one that is not being funded this year. And so there's been a lot of investments in public transit through the federal government, through provincial government grants. So we've been able to purchase new buses, really jump forward in bringing our fleet to a modern level. But there are a few things that need to change. And one of them that will be coming forward after we get through a report is modernizing our garage, because we can't do anything unless we have the garage space and the terminal space to deal with the increase in buses and routes. That is coming forward over the next couple of years. But part of it is, how do we see long-term investments, and what kind of system do we want to build? So, there is a conversation to say that there is an increase of 4.8% happening in Transit Windsor. And that amounts to somewhere in the vicinity of $15 to $16 million total. But you have to keep into consideration that almost 650,000 of that are for salaries. $800,000 of that is roughly is just the fuel market. So the fuel market rate increase. So the rate of the fuel that all of us are seeing, obviously a transit system is seeing a huge increase in that as well. So all of the changes that are come forward are really budgetary pressures that are created from, basically, in essence, things that we can't control. So fuel costs, labor costs, and then some revenue impacts from COVID. So all of those are things that we can't control. The things that were really service enhancements were making the 518X, that was a great success. The one from the East End to St. Clair College, making that permanent. That was, I believe, $190,000, I believe, to make that permanent. After that, there isn't really anything that does anything for the service enhancement. Hence why some of us are really pushing for the 418X route to be included, along with a couple of other minor things. But all of these things are things that are necessary to move transit forward. So we've heard over and over. Today there was a press conference. And for me, I guess the difficult thing is this. I know someone like Don, for example, has a certain perspective on taxes, and we're going to agree. Don doesn't pretend that he wants to invest and he wants to raise taxes or raise taxes so we can do things. What I find disingenuous is that we're having press conferences to tell people about these investments in transits and all these things when they're really not there. We can say, and if we want to be honest, we can say we just can't afford it this year. Just like what you say to your kids at Christmas time when there's no boxes under the Christmas tree, you can say those things. The problem here is that we're trying to pretend that there's all these things happening. The language you use, the city of Windsor subsidizes transit. We don't use the word subsidized when we talk about roads or sewers or backwater valves and things like that. We talk about investments. We talk about raising taxes and spending record amounts on roads and sewers, and we're proud of it. With transit, it's a subsidy. We also go to the users and have them pay the most in return as a consequence. So you mentioned the fare increases. The fare increases are being seen across the board to inflation, with one major change being the tunnel bus. The tunnel bus is an issue because it's a very unique service, and the fares for people, for example, who work in Detroit, who have a monthly pass, this increase won't affect them. So this is really for the occasional user who's going over for a Tigers game, for a Lions game, things like that. The issue there is that this service has been highly subsidized. This specifically, where the rest of the service covers a lot of the costs on these trips. So we were losing roughly $5 to $6 per trip on this route. So what you're seeing is more a reality of like the cost of service. And when you really look at, it would be, somebody, I think I saw on your thread, John, say, oh, I'll take an Uber over. Well, there isn't an Uber that isn't going to bring you over for, let's say it's a $20 fare for Uber. You're also paying for their toll, both to and from. So a one-way trip to Detroit is going to cost you $20 plus $13. That's $33 for your one-way trip. On your way back, you're going to have roughly the same because you have to pay both the tolls and the trip. So it's going to cost you $66. Now you may have 2, 3, 4 people in that car. If you have 3 people in the car, it would still be cheaper to take the Transit Windsor bus because it would be $20 each. So when you look at all the other things, like people driving across looking for parking and things like that, you're paying more than $20, $30 to park at any of these facilities. So it is a big jump, absolutely. But this is a jump that probably should have been done a long time ago and brought up incrementally, slowly. But so all that aside, when we're talking about, I guess the frustration for myself and other councillors, and I know we had this discussion last night with Councillor McKenzie and Holt, is that we make transit the centerpiece of a lot of our discussions and a lot of master plans. So we have a transit master plan, we have active transportation, we talk about climate change, we talk about mode shift that we want to do. We talk about all these things. In Windsor Works, it mentions how we need to be able to move people around the city and things like that. And here we are once again deferring any investments in transit. So we keep talking about these plans, we keep talking about these aspirations, yet we do nothing to get there. And if we were, in the upper echelon of spending, I would say, sure, it's okay to be, to tighten our belts this year and not invest and hold back. But we're literally at the bottom of transit spending for municipalities our size in the province. And so I posted a chart on my Twitter feed today, and it basically shows we're dead last. And so, when you look at urban centers that are mostly urban, who have systems that don't include subways, we are dead last in the province. And so we spend the least on transit per capita, and we offer the least amount of hours of service per cap. And here we are tightening our belts. And 6 months from now, when Windsor Works comes up, we're going to talk about how we want to be the envy of Ontario and how people want to move here because we're such a great center and we're such a great urban, dynamic and place to be. And yet we can't move people across the city with a proper public transit system. So we need to start talking in reality. So having press conferences, patting ourselves on the back because we're spending $800,000 more in fuel and $700,000 more on labor, on negotiated labor increases, is actually just ridiculous. So at what point can we have an honest discussion here? Just say, I don't care about transit and I don't care about making it a priority. And then this way we can actually stop, sort of talking about it and pretending when climate change comes up or when other issues come up. So we should realistically change the discussion to say, what do we prioritize? And at the end of the day, the things that we approve in our budget really are a better indication of our priorities than any master plans or any council votes, because this is the one where you have to put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, I want to touch on the tunnel bus item, because you mentioned a couple things there, Reno, that I find really interesting. And so when I saw that the transit fare was doubling for the tunnel bus, I immediately thought of the Windsor Works report. And there are a couple things there. The Windsor Works report calls for increasing our social and economic ties with Detroit. And it also calls for more mobility options for residents. So I want to dig into that because some of the things that you talked about in terms of the way that we get reports or master plans or vision documents and then don't implement them. And I think I think you're right on in terms of the budget is the true test of what the priorities are. But what would it look like? What do you think it takes for those items to be, those strategic decisions to be embedded in the decisions that come from, or the proposals that come from administration? So Transit Windsor brought this proposal forward. They proposed a fare increase. We want to raise the fare on the tunnel bus. At what point and who should be intervening to say this is not in line with our strategic priorities because of X, Y, and Z? Whose job is that?
Well, I mean, I guess there would be some discussion at the corporate leadership team level, so the CLT level, who sort of finalizes what comes to council. But to be blunt, I think it's up to council. I think it's up to us to see this as something other than a fare increase, but also tie it into some of our other priorities. You have to look at it in a specific way. So someone like Tyson Craig, who is the ED at Transit, who is somewhat new, and I think he's been doing a great job in the short time that he's been here, he has to run a system. And so at this point, if someone like John is taking a bus from downtown to St. Clair College or out near the Charles to work at early in the morning, John's trips are subsidizing Dawn's visit to Lionsgate. And so for Tyson, it's really about providing the service and the basic service and prioritizing the service within Transit Windsor. To your point, if we want to use that Transit Windsor connection across the border in a strategic way to increase connections there, then City Council needs to decide to specifically fund those types of things. But when he inserts it into the rest of the system, he has to look at it and say, okay, if the average fare covers, X amount of the trip, then the average fare across the border should also do the same. And so I don't blame Tyson for bringing forward a fare increase. We have to discuss on what we want to do and how we want to do that. And so, and like I said, I think there is a point where there is a fair value to that. Like I said, I saw people commenting on John's thread, but they left out a lot of, realities when it comes to the numbers. No Uber is taking you over for $20 because it's $13 in toll. So you're not getting over in $7. hold on, John. So the issue then becomes on how do you value it, and how does it meet the strategic priorities? So to your point, Doug, I would say that Transit Windsor sets it at $10, but then we run a special program or something where you could buy tickets on the city's website and get a $5 discount or a $3 discount or a $4 discount as we promote certain things or certain aspects that are happening in Detroit, or vice versa, because you also want Americans to come here, probably more so than bringing Canadians over there. So I think it needs to be targeted. If you're just looking at people who are going over for the football game or something like that, it's not a bad thing, and we want to encourage that. But at the same time, someone who's going over and paying $120 for a seat at a game, and they would have paid $20, $30 for parking, a $20 round trip is not a bad deal for the transit system to get you there and back. So if we want to strategically use it to increase tourism or increase, let's say there's, for example, there's a convention in town, and a lot of people are staying in Detroit, some are staying in Windsor, and we want to offer them across border. Then we offer a special code on an app, and it gives you a discount of 50% or 80% or something, whatever we want to give. And we treat it strategically. I think what he did here was he set the real value of the trip from just a base level kind of consumer index look at it. And then we as a city council should decide on how to use that strategically, in my opinion. John,
did you want to say something about the Uber there, Johnny?
No. Don, please jump in.
All right. Well, since I'm being viciously attacked with every comment that he makes about transit, but I'd like to thank John for subsidizing my trip over to the Lions game. Refresh my memory on the transit master plan. What was kind of the comments concerning the current routes in Windsor?
You mean from the public engagement? What was the...
Yeah, like as far as going forward with the transit plan, were there going to be any variations, or were there any suggestions to changing routes? Because for sure. So from my far away looks, the same routes were there when I was going to high school that are there now, which doesn't seem like they'd really be applicable as the city's expanded.
So not only are the same, but what we've done is, you've got a route that goes east-west, we've added a loop in Fontainebleau. Then at the end, we've added a loop in Forest Glade. And we've always done it piecemeal, and everything was ad hoc. So as soon as, East Riverside was built out, all we did was add an extra loop to one of the 2 or 3 buses in the area. So the issue is that, to your point, we need to institute a new route. So what you're going to see is more of a grid. So east-west, like for example, if you take the Crosstown 2, it's a great bus. If you take the 1C, it's a great bus for the most part, except for all these small loops that it does, and it goes out of the straight line. This one that's being presented, the 418X, is actually an express route. So it's an express route from Tecumseh Mall all the way to the West End terminal at Hotel Dieu Grace. So everywhere in between will build off that route, and that's an express route. So somebody coming from Tecumseh could get dropped off at the mall, take the bus to the university, and do so in a faster manner. So what you're going to see long-term, Don, is more routes, more shorter, more grid-like, and you would basically have the opportunity to transfer a couple times, but everything being faster because of it.
So the reason I asked that, I actually watched the press conference today that the mayor and the head of transit had, and a lot of the spending or capital improvements they made were bus shelters. I think they're like 184. Like, wouldn't it make sense to do the routes first and then put the infrastructure in for them? If we're going to put in 184 bus shelters on current routes, and the routes are going to be changing, it seems like that's going to be a waste of money because you have to do it again.
So most of the capital that has been spent recently is not our money. It was from the federal government. So most of the programs come down, and they're very specific tranches of funding. So the shelters were part of a fund for shelters and terminals. So we did the West End terminal, and we modernized a bunch of shelters. But the shelters were actually one of the things that got discussed the most, right? So because people waiting in the cold snow or rain is pretty shitty, right? So those were actually some of the most comments, but there were tranches of money. And then what ended up happening was when money came for specifically for buses, that's why you see the 24 buses that we were able to buy. But then there's also money for things like, for example, connecting sidewalks from one bus area to another bus area, or bike lanes for that last mile. So things are all tied into very specific tranches of funding. And that's why you saw things like the bus shelters, things like that. But in comparison, the institution of more, so the bus shelters are $2,000 each. We did 100, whatever. So you're talking about 2 million, like whatever it was to do a lot, a new route. And, for example, like we're going to have to buy new buses, hire new drivers. So the operational cost is there plus the capital cost. So the institution of the entire master plan will be quite expensive. So you can't just add one route. So for example, why we're pushing for this 418X is because it's the east-west spine. So once this one is set up and once it starts getting usage, then you can start splintering off some of the side ones and connecting them north-south. And you'd have to introduce 1 or 2 a year. You can't just change the grid tomorrow and expect it to work, right? So, and expect us to have all the drivers, all the buses, the garage that can handle it. So it's a plan that's really, it has to be incremental, and it is phased in, both for the funding amount, because the funding is going to go up, up, and up, and for the reality of the fact that we can't do these things overnight without putting a shock to the system.
That makes sense. And just one more comment about the tunnel bus route. As someone who drives a big giant Ford F-150 that is ridiculous and uses a lot of gas.
Pictured behind me.
Yes, I also, exactly. That's what fits in the back of my truck. A lot of people go over there and use the excuse to fill up on gas too, which may seem ridiculous, but honestly, it saves me something around $40 every time I go over there and fill up. So you're also going to get, look, I've used the tunnel bus. I think the tunnel bus is a great service. I'm not sure if I'm going to pay $20 to go there and back, because I can park downtown for $20. And so it's costing me $12 not to have to take the bus. And like I say, with the gas situation, you're saving, $40, $50 filling up my giant, stupid truck. So
can we go to Mexican town too, and I'll pay Canadian money at park?
Sure, 100%. See, it's a win-win for everybody.
So to that point, like, we understand that, and I think we also know that, I think they anticipated a drop in 30% of the trips because it being too expensive. But I think until we get to a point where we want to use it strategically, like keep people using it and going to and from, like, I guess transit, like Tyson would say to you, well, if you have the means to use your truck and you want to choose to do so, go ahead, because I'm not going to take $6 out of my budget just to get you to a Lions game, right? So it's more so for the people that there isn't other options or are willing to do this. I mean, you could, like I said, if you were driving over by yourself, toll and parking both ways is probably $35, $40. So once you start to get into that range, you could go over, take the bus, drink all you want, don't have to worry about it, come back and have no issues. So it's to me, it's a good, reliable service. Am I going to win over the people who have the means to take their F-150 and spend $50 on parking? No, but if that fits your means, then so be it. Then I don't think the rest of us should be subsidizing that type of outing, so to speak.
Was the option of doing cutting back on fewer times it goes over? Was that option looked at? Like instead of run hourly, run every 2 hours?
Well, I think it's both. I think they're reviewing the entire service in general. The issue is that, for example, the commuters morning and evening need those same buses, right? So we do have a regular crop of commuters, and they're not paying the $10 per trip. They're buying a $95 pass per month. So, and they're not seeing that increase. So that's the other side of it. And that kind of ties in with the Windsor Works things as well. If you work over in Detroit, it still is economical because you have basically the cost of a bus pass or the monthly parking pass. You have a pass to get over an international border.
Well, I'd prefer if we just keep sticking it to John, but go ahead, Doug.
I just wanted to ask about a detail on this that I think listeners may be curious about too. The city of Windsor owns the Windsor Detroit Tunnel Corporation, does it not?
Yes.
So we pay a toll to ourselves?
Well, yeah, because those are, it is extremely complicated. And I'll be honest, I don't know it 100%. So the operating agreement, like we own the asset. It doesn't like, and that asset could yield a dividend, but doesn't always. In fact, often doesn't, especially during, COVID times, for example. So yes. So in essence, yes, but the toll, what I'm saying is the toll from the bus is not necessarily the cost, because it's also going to, there are federal entities. So because it's crossing a border and it becomes a federal entity, there are a lot more expenses tied to even staffing, HR, all those kinds of things. So it's not necessarily like the increase is not tied to the toll being increased for the bus. What I was getting at with Don is that the average car is paying $13. So I think even if we were to waive the toll for a bus, it would not impact the cost of that service that much. It's there are layers of other things, mostly that it's a federal entity. I mean, if we were to get rid of it entirely, there would be a lot of headaches and a lot of money that would be saved just because of the fact that we end up becoming a federal entity. In fact, one of the pressure increases that caused the increase in cost was something like a $48,000 increase, because as a federal entity, transit drivers will get the new Indigenous holiday off or paid. And so that's different than provincial or municipal employees. And so that's a unique budgetary pressure, right? And there's more of those, but there's a lot of those small things that make it just a little bit more costly.
Will we be getting our third shot in the tunnel this time, or do I still have to go to the doctor's office?
No comment.
I wanted to dive in a bit deeper to, you were talking earlier about the need for change and the modern garage and terminal space that would help bring on, new buses and routes. You and I have spoken about this before off camera about how our garage, just teeing this up for you, it was built essentially for, an internal combustion based fleet, really good at fixing engines, really good at maintaining them. Not so great at having spaces to plug buses in to keep them charged. What do we need specifically to be able to, go and electrify the entire fleet and to get these cost savings from not having to deal with fuel to be able to expand the fleet? What are our limitations by not providing the capital required to upgrade to a modern hub that's necessary for 2021 and not, I don't know, when was that place built? I'd imagine somewhere between 65 and 79.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I mean, I would say it's at least 40, 50 years old, but so I think the issue is I don't want to muddy the waters. I don't want to say that we need a new garage just because of electrification. Electrification is one potential direction we can go in, but whether we go with electrification or not, we need a new garage or we need an expanded garage. We are already operating at capacity, and so the capacity that we're at right now can't take the growth in the routes, in the buses, all the things that we just talked about with Don's questions, insofar as increasing the routes, increasing the hours on the road per bus, increasing the number of buses. So we don't have the capacity in the garage to handle that, whether it's electric or diesel. So the feasibility study will basically come back to us with, what do we need? What do we need if we want to electrify? What do we need right now? What do we need in the 10-year plan? Can we do something by adding space, by buying land next door and just building it out from there? Like how can it make it work? So if we don't, how could I say this? If we don't do that, all these routes we keep talking about, we can't add. there's nowhere to service these buses. There's nowhere for the buses to get clean, to get fuel, to get all those things. So that's an important next step, even before we talk about electrification. The issue with electrification is not really, it's not really so cut and dry in the sense that we're going to save on the fuel costs, because each bus, for example, a diesel bus is about 650,000, and new electric buses are anywhere from 1.4 to 2.9. So the cost of the individual bus skyrockets, and then the infrastructure and everything else. I could confidently say that we're not going to go towards electrification in a major way until the federal government ponies up quite a bit of cash, because we can't afford it. Even I will tell you that the tax base, municipal tax base, cannot afford that kind of leap forward. That will take a major investment from the federal government to move everybody across the country towards electrification. Because at this point, I mean, when you're looking at sometimes 3 or 4 times the cost for the initial bus outlay, you're talking in the tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to phase that in, like tens of millions of dollars every few years to phase in these buses. So, I think we have 112, so triple the cost, in the 3-something million range, would be quite a problem. So they're two different things, but I want to make sure that everybody understands we need the garage because we need the ability to expand the services and to do everything we need to do in that spot to expand the services. If we don't have that, even our current diesel fleet won't be able to grow and expand the system that we want to go.
So I want to dive into a detail on the electric buses. If replacing the fleet with electric buses is something that only the federal government or presumably the provincial government has the resources to deliver to municipalities, how will municipalities be able to continue to maintain their fleets in the future, or will they always be dependent on senior government?
Well, I mean, that's the $1 million question. I think to a certain extent we are reliant on senior levels of government. I think every time we go to ACUTA, FCM, AMO, they're always looking to the federal government for more sustainable funding. You always see, for example, these last, it was PTIF, ISIP, these acronyms you hear all about. These are always there for quick injections of capital. So you'll see hundreds of millions of dollars injected. I think we were getting upwards of 50+ million from the federal government alone. I think the total between the feds, the province, municipal, was going to be in the $100 million range. But any large investment moving us forward away from diesel into electrification, I think we'll always need a federal government boost. I think you're also going to see a huge push for a better sustained operating pipeline of cash coming from the federal government through gas tax transfers, through carbon tax transfers, things like that. A lot of these pressures are very hard for a mid-level size urban area municipality to deal with from property tax base. And so it's one thing to be on the hook for the operating. It's a different thing to literally be on the hook for what is a once in a lifetime switch over and modernization. And some of that also comes with the infrastructure, right? Because even electric buses, we haven't yet hit that stride of where all electric buses are the same. You have some that still have like the pole that runs on like a in a designated lane that is getting power from the poles. You have some that have to have charging stations all along. You have some that have to go back to the garage so you have to have more buses. So there still isn't uniformity across the industry to say that this is the industry standard and that they have this many running hours per battery and this is how you charge them. So there's still a lot of questions. And then there's the infrastructure to charge to continue to be able to handle that switch over. So until that happens, and all the large entities and systems, like whether it be Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, once you see them starting to bring on electric, I would guarantee 100% of the time that is if not 100%, but probably 60, 70, 80 funded by the federal government. So, and those are the huge infrastructure announcements you see when the federal government is saying we're investing, $2 billion into public transit. That's the kind of stuff that you hear about. So we're always going to be dependent on it to a certain degree. And I think when it comes to electrification, that's a huge step. That's a generational change that isn't going to just happen with municipal tax bases.
Yeah, and I suppose it's true that only a fraction of the city's budget is funded out of the municipal tax base as it is. There's significant transfers from senior government. So, and I know this is a tangent, but I really want to chase it down because I'm curious what your thoughts are. You talked about grant funding and one-offs, and we've certainly seen Windsor go through the hoops of applying for this, grant X, Y, or Z, and sometimes we're successful and sometimes we're not. And I just want you to expand on the thought that you had about stable flows of funds. Do you think that there is a better model for funding municipalities than what we have now, and what would that look like?
Well, this could be like 4 shows.
Sorry, I'm really curious though.
I mean, general funding. I mean, huge
can
changes.
Can you keep it to like 3 minutes to 4 minutes though, as well?
Yeah. Huge changes to the Municipal Act, I think, are definitely warranted. I think the fact that we only have property tax as a mechanism to tax our residents. The fact that I think we get 8 cents per dollar from the other levels of government of taxation. Yeah, I mean, we get screwed, and yet we are the ones who enact all the policies. We are the ones who are on the front lines of everything, even things like climate change and other things. The municipalities are the ones who are dealing with the service delivery on a daily basis, and yet we get some of the smallest pieces of revenue. Even when people talk about, not wanting to pay more tax, their property tax is the smallest amount of tax they pay. With income tax, sales tax, everything else, the property tax is the smallest amount of tax they pay, and they probably get the most for it. So yes, I mean, simple question. Yes, we need to look at how we fund municipalities in general. I think taxation, we either need to have more taxation rights, or we need to be granted a higher percentage of the taxation that happens at the other levels, whether it is sales tax, whether it is income tax, and get, right now we have 8 cents. Realistically, that should be closer to 20 cents consistently from the province. And the fact is, at the end of the day, you could probably actually increase that roughly to 40% and then get away from all these one-off grants, right? So there's all these grants for municipalities. And if you think about it, the federal government, all like pretty much anything. So whether it was the grant for trying to get for the trolley, or whether it's funding for sewers, or funding for roads, or funding for recreation or climate change, there's always these grant applications, and 10% win, 90% lose. So we're always, doing all those things as opposed to take all that money, put it in a pot, and disperse it equally amongst the population and amongst the different municipalities, and be done with it. And maybe attach certain things to it, make you even make more prescriptive policies to say that this, you can only spend money like this, create more green belts, do whatever you feel is necessary to think that the municipalities are spending it within a scope or confines that you want, climate change or something like that. But as opposed to, applying for these grants and jumping through all these hoops, only to disappoint 70 to 90% of the municipalities who are applying, it just doesn't work. And then we're hoping, right now we're hoping we get the money for 80 knocks, and if we're hoping we get it, and if we don't, okay, it changes, and then we have to change our entire capital budget. Whereas why don't we just get, we know that this year we're getting 12.6 million from the feds to be spent on these 7 items, or this much that is on transit. So, and if we have no public transit system, then you don't get the funding, because transit, housing, those types of things can and should be priorities of the federal government, and they should be expecting that municipalities deliver those services. And so I'm okay with even the expectation that, for every dollar I give you, you have to spend 3. I'm even okay with that. but just make it simple and consistent. So give me that dollar and I'll put in 3, but then I can spend it however I want in my transit system.
So I just have one more question about the capital expenditure on the new buses. Obviously, everybody's trying to green fleets for whether it's corporations or cities. And I don't know if you have the answer to this question, but I'm starting to see now a lot of municipalities are skipping right over electric and going to hydrogen powered buses. Is that something Windsor is considering?
Yes, just because it's on the table with all of it, but going to hydrogen is actually part of like what I mentioned earlier. With electrification, there's no set standard. Hydrogen is easier in the sense that the system runs similar to your diesel system, the system, not the bus itself, but the system. And so the electrification and everything that comes with it, because you'd have to redo your garage, you'd have to redo your system. That's why some of the systems are skipping over it, or at least right now. And until we get a clear indication of what that system looks like in under electrification, or at least what the standard would be, it almost is easier for some of them to skip right over and go to hydrogen, because it's not worth them to go through all the infrastructure changes and all the peripheral money that's needed to run your electric fleet.
John, you're on mute, buddy.
I am on mute, but I'm not anymore. Okay, well, I think we've exhausted transit as much as we can in the time that we've allotted for it. Not that we've exhausted the conversation, because there is a lot more to still talk about, but we'll try to get to that in our next show. Councillor, we do want to have you on to speak about this, though. There's been a 27% increase in the number of Windsorites experiencing homelessness on a nightly basis compared to 2018, according to the Community Services and Parks Standing Committee. This is obviously a significant rise in chronic homelessness, and we've seen and continued overrepresentation of Indigenous people as well, included in these numbers. Now, city staff is recommending that council lobby higher levels of government to deal with this situation, which, I mean, it's fair. The city has already invested into a new homelessness hub that's going to be implemented and built out. It's not to say, and then obviously having invested significantly as well through the downtown mission during the middle of COVID. Not to say we're where the middle is, though. But I guess I'm wondering, with that right there, going straight to you, Councillor, recommendation to lobby higher levels of government. Was there something I missed there reading through it? Like, why is that the recommendation, only to, ask higher levels?
Well, I don't think it's only. I think we've been exacerbated ourselves, and I think I think what they've seen. So there has been an increase. Some of that is tied to better data collection. So what we've seen is a sustained increase. I wouldn't say it's a large increase. I think it's a noticeable increase, because the point in time count, the pit count is a point in time count, is a singular night, versus the system that we now have called the by name system. So that by name system allows us to track people within the system throughout, they're moving from agency to agency or things like that. One of the things that we've realized, though, is that more and more the idea of homelessness, we always hear, you end homelessness by building housing, and that's true. The problem is a lot of people, even if you were to house them tomorrow, could not remain housed. So they need supports, and they need supports because they're dealing with mental health issues, addictions issues, and other types of issues. These are health issues. These are health issues that the provincial government has slowly offloaded and downloaded, and basically all the things tied to mental health that used to be, institutions a long time ago, a generation ago. Once they decided to close those, they didn't fill that gap. So all those people who were in institutions or relying on those kinds of institutions for their care now are either in the care of the family or quite often on the streets. And so, I mentioned this today. When I ran in 2014, the issue of homelessness and all those things was not at all an issue. Not one person that I knocked on a door made this an issue. It exploded when the things tied to addictions and mental health became a huge issue. When those two issues took over the social side of it, and then we saw a change in the housing market, now we have this emergency situation with homelessness. And what's frustrating is that the federal government just gave us money to buy shelters. That's great. So what they're doing is they're offering us a bigger Band-Aid. So here's a shelter. So here's all the homeless people that are out in the streets tonight. We can fill more of them in a building. But instead of solving the problem of why they're homeless in the first place, we're just continuing to do the Band-Aid solution. We have to, right now, if you want help in addictions, the minimum is 60, 70 days. Mental health supports, non-existent. The report today also showed that out of the people interviewed in the last 6 months, the cost to the healthcare system with the amount of times that there was people in and out of the hospital was over $600,000 or just under $600,000. There was also another statistic that showed that 10% of the people interviewed had interactions with police 10 or more times in the last 6 months. We right now, and I see this on a police board, and I hear this at every police meeting that I am with other counterparts across the province, we send police to deal with social issues. We send, we create homeless shelters and charity agencies and charity outlets to deal with the root issues of it, only in a way that basically all these other agencies, whether they're outreach workers, whether they're shelters, they're just dealing with the Band-Aid solution. Until we can house them with supports, deal with their mental health issues, deal with their addictions, we're not actually going to reduce that number. We're just moving them around. And so the petitioning of the federal and provincial governments is because this is a health issue, and the mental health issue and the addictions issues, we need tens of millions of dollars. There is nothing that we can do. I've always advocated when push comes to shove and there's a lot of decisions where, we need to hire an outreach worker or we need to fill gap funding. I've always been a proponent that municipal dollars can and should do those things. But overall, should municipal dollars be funding mental health supports and addictions? No, it was never created to do so. And if you want to see at huge costs, I mean, we would need $20, $30 million locally just to start making a dent. What that would do for the taxes or for our tax increase, that would be a huge tax increase. So what we need to do is the federal government and the provincial government need to realize that we're spending more on healthcare, reacting to it, more on policing, reacting to it, and actually try to deal with the root problems. That's why this letter was sent out. And you're going to see more of them at every police board meeting, all the we sat around the chairs association of the Big 12 forces in Ontario and talked about some of the big issues, and everybody talked about the social issues. And then what we saw from the ministry, from the Ministry of the Attorney General, was that, there'd be a pilot project to do, $50,000 to put mental health workers with police, $50,000. We need $25 million here in Windsor just to actually start really dealing with the problem. And we get $50,000 as a pilot project. So until those levels of government, when we had issues with flooding, we paid for it. Other levels of government came in and supplied tens of millions of dollars. When COVID hit us, we did the same. We need to understand that this is an emergency and we need other levels of government to step up. Without that, we're not going to make a dent. Municipally, I want to say and want to tell people, anybody listening, we are doing a lot. And we are, I think, at one of the best municipalities our size, maybe even including Toronto and others, on how we're dealing with these issues. All you have to do is look at how the municipality of Hamilton and how the city of Toronto dealt with the encampments in their cities and how we dealt with ours. And so we have been dealing with them, and our approach has been working for what that's worth. The problem won't go away until we actually deal with it. So, when we have natural disasters, we throw a lot of money to it. When there are other issues, we throw a lot of money to it. This is something where we need a lot of money to it. The problem is that we've let social issues like this slide, and it's okay when they're at the bottom of the spectrum when it comes to priorities for spending.
Now, personally, I think that's a very negative attitude, Councillor, because if you remember, it was just back in the spring, we solved racism with $200,000. So I don't see why we couldn't solve these problems with $50,000. I just have a question. In the breakdown in the report, was there a breakdown obviously I'm very familiar with the rising cost of real estate in the city. Was there a breakdown of people experiencing homelessness relative to this percentage was addictions, but these people, it was really an economic or a cost problem? Because we do know that there are people who are homeless now just blatantly because they can't afford housing. And it's not that they're not working. It's not that they don't have an income. It's just too expensive.
Right. And it breaks it down in a few different categories: episodic, chronic, and just sort of one-off. So there are, those that end up couch surfing, who we consider to be, on that verge of homelessness, where they don't have a home, but they're in somebody's home. And so it talks about economics. It talks about, how many of them economically, as a family, only had ODSP, or how many of them as a family had a single income where it was tenuous. So it really breaks it down for how many of them were experiencing addictions or mental health. I think addictions and mental health were like 64 and 67% respectively. So, those are high rates. And so the issue as well, I'll go so far as to say there's addictions, there's mental health, and then there's just general poverty. And so to your point, they're not going to be able to afford a house. And now rents are also creeping way up. Yet ODSP has stayed the same, and I think even had a slight decrease for 1 year. So that aspect to it too. I mean, for people who are on disability, for people who are on Ontario Works, those supports need to increase as well, because even just general rents have gone up. So even if you are on a waiting list and you do get it, you're probably seeing a 20, 30, 40% in rent over the last 3 years. So, and yet those supports have not gone up either. But again, that's a provincial government program. And so unless they actually start to fund it properly, those families are never going to be able to afford a home.
Does my 21-year-old kid who refuses to move out of my basement, does he count as homeless in those numbers?
Not at this time.
No.
Unless he was counting.
Yeah.
So I want to ask, and I know Jon is eager to move the show along, but I want to ask a question that is somewhat related. So 63% of adults have a mental health condition. I believe that addictions are a major component of the challenges that folks experiencing homelessness face. Relatedly, I think that this has often been framed as a downtown issue. This is something that people talk about as an issue that is, exists in the core of our city, and it's something unique to the core of our city. But I live in South Windsor, and I can tell you that, anecdotally, in my experience, we're starting to see more and more of these issues in other parts of the city. And you can't tell when you encounter someone, whether they are homeless or not, whether they would have been counted in this in the count, whether they would have been in there or not. Although I suspect when I see someone's, for example, sleeping in a bus shelter, they most likely would be. So my question to you is, as this issue spreads across the city and escapes the boundaries of downtown, do you think that there will be more political will to deal with it in a productive way? Or do you think that political will already exists and there's just a financial challenge?
I think we're getting closer with the political will, because whether the homelessness, the addictions, or the mental health are actually happening or present in other wards, people see what that impact is on the downtown, and they realize the importance of the downtown. And it's not because downtown has weaker people or whatever. It's just the natural inclination of that's where the denser population is. That's where the lower income of housing or the lower rents are. That's where the clusters of multi-res are. And that's where a lot of the cluster of the services are that service these people. So what is happening now is that there's a greater understanding. And I think some of this has just been because of us screaming from the rooftops for about 4 or 5 years. And I look at this year's budget as an example. This year's budget has at least $1.5 to $1.6 million added to the operating budget specifically for housing and homelessness, or homelessness initiatives and social initiatives. That hasn't happened before in my time. And anything that has come forward has always been a fight. I mean, last year we had to fight for one outreach worker and we didn't get it. This year's there's two and we didn't even have to ask for it or fight for it. So I think we have elevated to the discussion for them for more people, and I don't mean just politically, but I think the general public, to see this as a community issue. I also think that there is more of an understanding that they're starting to know, oh, their nephew's friend is addicted to drugs or has issues or those types of things. So it's starting to seep and become a personal thing. I remember a CBC article, and actually a CBC piece for the news, where I was shocked at the way they described it, saying how homelessness has been an issue for a long time, but now that it's, not just the people in the alleys and things like that, and it's your friends and your neighbors, now it's really become an issue. And the way that they talked about it, and it was okay for those people to be dying in the alleys, but now that it's hit the suburbs or different areas, it's now something we need to pay attention to. So I think we've crossed that bridge to some degree. I mean, I think it's always going to be work. And I think the council makeup of having one councillor represent the entirety of downtown, I think will always be a challenge. But it really is a financial issue and a financial burden. And the financial burden, I can tell you right now, I would be the first one with my hand up to defund police if we could. And we can defund police, but we need to be able to set all these other programs up to handle the changes. We could easily cut $5 or $10 million from the police budget if they didn't have to deal with even half of the mental health or addiction calls that they get. And so it is a lot about money. And I think that the political will is getting there because more people want to be able to go downtown for dinner and experience a nice downtown and not have to worry about someone in a shopping cart yelling at them or something like that. And I think that is cluing in. But at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, there will be more money for things happening that are important to the residents in those wards of people that vote versus the ones that are experiencing poverty.
Well, let's use this as a diving off point to talk about budgets and priorities and what those are. And you've got a councillor colleague, Ward 1, Fred Francis. He's doing, it's like he's a stand-up comedian. He's pulling out the hits, and he's calling for a 0% tax increase. I don't think anyone here is surprised. It has, it's worked for him in the past before.
This is our unbiased coverage from Rose City politics, by the way. Go ahead.
I'm just saying he's pulling out the hits. It's unbiased, maybe a bit of a slant in terms of the editorial coverage. We can all agree on that. Sure. The 2022 draft budget, of course, it's calling for a 1.99% tax hike, or $60 on the average house assessed at $165,000 roughly. Councillor Francis, he's doing what he does. We've spoken about him on the show. I've dubbed it, faux fiscal conservatism. You and I have spoken about that type of idea before, Councillor, as well. He's quoted as saying to ask people to pay more taxes is highly irresponsible because they're already paying more. And he's referencing the fact that, inflation is up right now. We're in the midst of a pandemic. People might be laid off. All of the things that we've heard the mayor, quite frankly, say already as well. He says, though, that he knows that 0% is not popular with his councillor colleagues, and that he's going to try to do his best to try to convince you that, quote, now is not the time to increase taxes needlessly. So that's where I wanted to start things off. He's framing this entire thing around a needless increase. Most interesting, and we can dive into the politics of the politics afterwards. Is that a direct swipe against Mayor Dilkins, saying that the 1.99% is a needless tax increase? I mean, that's how it reads on face value, of course, although it seems like he might be trying to speak to maybe, you or some of your more progressive colleagues in the wishes that you have, right? We're limited here to what is being presented to us. what's your take on this? And what's the backroom chatter? Am I off base in that presumption right there? Is that a swipe at the mayor, or is that a swipe at you and your friends?
I don't know if it's a swipe. I think his position is clear. It's always been. I mean, I've heard this 8 other times, so this isn't really anything new. I knew this weeks ago.
My dad always still tells me like the old Eddie Murphy jokes off of the album that his dad said was not appropriate whatsoever. So I mean, it was raw.
So the issue really is this: forget about, let's put the political aside for a second, because this is a political statement, and this is about it's a political statement. You run a corporation. For all those pressures that people are experiencing, the corporation has seen worse. So as I brought up with transit's increase was 4.8%, and that was labor and fuel. So we have the ABCs, those, police and health unit, we can't say no to. IRCA, those are all legislated expenses that we can't change. Ambulance as well. So 0.8 of it is something that we can't change or control. The 1.16 is an asset management plan. That's the equivalent of, I like to call this, I gift my son a car, and 5 years later I say how it's running, and he's like, oh, it's not running that great. Oh, have you needed to put anything into it? No, it's been great. I haven't even changed the oil for 5 years. I've saved like $600 because I haven't changed the oil in 6 years. Oh, great. Would you say that? Or would you say, what the, so this is where we're at. We're a municipality that hasn't changed the oil in 18 years. And we then wonder why our transit system sucks. We then wonder why our basements flood. We then wonder why our roads are cracking, even though we're spending records on roads. And so, I mean, it's pretty simple. And this is why I also think it has nothing to do with being conservative or being liberal or being, a lefty or a righty. True conservatism is investing and reaping rewards from your investment. If you want to see progress in a community, because we don't run a business for the bottom line. The bottom line here is services. So the people that he's talking about and using, that he says he gets calls from daily, these people on fixed incomes and seniors who can't afford increases, those people rely on public services the most. They take public transit. So $56 is the increase. Now let's look at, a couple of years ago, this was the example that I used. When you increase service fees, so the people in my neighborhoods that need to go now get a rat abatement program, their neighbors are landlords from Calgary that haven't taken care of the property. So now they have rats. They have to call in and get the rat abatement program. It's now $20. So they have to do that. And they have to do that twice in the year because it's so bad. That's $40. Now, that $40 is just right off the top service fees that weren't there last year, or these are proposed. Now you take into consideration their daughter or son takes the bus and goes to university from downtown. At one point, we had increased the fares by a quarter. Twice a day, 5 times a week is $250 a week. Let's say they go to school 30 weeks. You're now at $75 and $40. You're at $115 of new service fees that they didn't pay last year. You think they would choose a $56 tax increase or a $75 or $115 increase in service charges? So we forget and we pretend like this tax rate is the final goal. Like hitting 0 is like you won the lottery. Except, I love Chris's line, Councillor Holt's line. The budget tells you what kind of city you want to be. And we're aiming to be the dollar store city. So let's reduce it. The dollar store city who hasn't changed their oil in 18 years. Is that the tagline we want on our sign? Because we also talk about Windsor Works being this place, this enviable place that people want to move here and invest here and bring your company here. Who the hell wants that? You know what I didn't see in the Amazon bid? I didn't see taxes very low, service charges really high. the council's commitment to keeping taxes low. I don't think I've ever seen that in any of the companies that chose to come here. So what I've seen is a quality of life. So quality of life things, our transit system sucks. We invest in it the least out of anywhere in the province. Coincidence? No. So you start to look at across the board, all the other things, our sewers, everything else, our sewer master plan, and then the sewer surcharge. So we also talk about the zero. Councillor Francis and others and Councillor Geniac are very happy to reap the rewards of our sewer surcharge, which is basically a tax. So we created a sewer surcharge, very smart thing to do. And now we never talk about funding sewers because we have record amounts of money, especially matching dollars for the federal government, because we created a sewer surcharge. That's a tax. So that tax funds all these sewer repairs so we don't flood our basements anymore.
Well, as someone who lives in your ward, Reno, I could solve the rat problem just by renting out the cats that live in my backyard during the winter. So if anyone needs a cat,
it is actually a good thing. We got an influx of cats in my neighborhood, and nobody complained because there was no more rats.
That's why I keep saying we should introduce the Essex County cougar back into the area, and it'll just fix all of our problems. But what you brought up with Councillor Francis, and look, I'm not going to sit here and say I like paying more taxes because I don't. I don't mind paying more taxes if I think they're going to something useful. And what you spoke about, which I think is very indicative of what I feel the problem is in the city is, yeah, we don't want to pay more taxes for operational things, but we want $10 million fancy streetlights in Southwood Lakes. And isn't that really, you can actually have both. We've had many discussions about the aquatic center, about, they want to spend 20 some odd million to put a cover on the stage downtown. The new library is going to cost $45-50 million. Isn't it really about priorities where you could maybe cut back on that capital expenditure, put that into operating to provide what, in my opinion, are necessary services like for homeless, for transit, for blah, 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 blah. And that'll offset the cost. Like, these things are priorities. Fancy lights in Southwood Lakes are not a priority. We had a library. We can have a whole discussion on the library, though, what that cost is going to be. There is money there. It just seems about what our priorities seem to be in the city.
Absolutely. But you're also starting at a point where your goal is to reduce. So the other thing is that the services that a municipality can provide, once you do so on a level of a municipality, there's no one else who can compete. So my family is a huge user of the library. The services of the library, for example, if we were to go to a paid outlet or get Audible or all those other things, that would probably be $25 to $30 a month for our family to have the same level of service we get at the library. That's $360 a year. That's almost 10% of my tax bill. That's just for libraries. Meanwhile, I only pay, in my taxes, something like $7 towards our library system. So we forget that creating a co-op and creating this co-op by creating a municipality and everybody buying into it allows us to get better services that won't be cheaper if we were to get them elsewhere. Now, I agree it's about priorities. For example, should we build slip and slide water parks? No. That's not a priority. So the issue, I was actually willing to vote in favor for the lights in Southwood Lakes, and I was prepared to do so if we made it an equitable policy that treated all lights, including alley lights and things, the same. They would not do that, so I didn't support it. So it's about policies and how we treat everything. So, for example, the park behind your house, the alley behind your house, how those are maintained, the street, the curbs, the streets, everything else. The things that we maintain on a municipal level, we should be very proud of. And what you get for what you pay is extreme value. So the race to the bottom is where I question it. I agree with you that we definitely have to talk about priorities, and that's the type of things. We often focus on the capital items, the trolleys, the this and that. But again, those are things that are nice to have. There's nothing wrong with those in a nice community. I voted for the trolley. I want to go down. I want to sit down, have a glass of wine overlooking the riverfront and enjoy a nice beacon experience, beacon, whatever you want to call it. I want that. I think that's a worthwhile expenditure. But we have to be prepared to say, if that's worthwhile, safety in somebody's alley is also worthwhile. So we need to set some minimum understanding of the service levels we want. So we have been addicted to this number. And the thing that Councillor Holt and I have been saying for 7 years is, let's set the standard of service and then depict that number. So for example, you guys have never, you haven't been away, you know, you're dying for a vacation. March, you're going to take a vacation. Your first decision is like, okay, I'm going somewhere hot. So you set the standard. I'm going somewhere hot. Then you say, you check your bank account and you're like, shit, I can only afford X amount. So now you reduced it to like, okay, I only have choices of these 5 places. Then you start narrowing it down. What do you get? Oh, this is an all-inclusive. I get food, I get this, I get this. You don't just say, I'm going to spend $1,200 on a vacation, and wherever you land because you're going for a vacation for $1,200. No, you talk about where you went, what you chose to do, and what you got for that $1,200. That's how you set out to do something and invest $1,200. We don't do that. We say it's got to be zero. It's got to be zero, even if that means your car pulls over on the side of the road because you haven't changed the oil in 6 years. So this is where we look at it the entire wrong way. I had a conversation with someone who said, I don't want to buy a condo where the condo fees are really low, because then that tells me the maintenance and the way that the everything around your condo is going to be crap. I don't want to live in a crap condo. Condo fees in many places are actually double tax rates, and yet people pay them without batting an eye. We always talk about taxes, and we always like $56 a year. That is $4.66 a month. $4.66 a month, $1.20 a week less is what we're talking about when we say an increase of this amount. And when we add all the transit investments, and when we add all the investments that I want to add, we're talking $1.26 a week. That's what we're talking about. We talk about taxes and high taxes and all these things. We don't actually talk in actualities. $56 is the annual increase that we're talking about. And what that does is it accounts for everything that we talked about in that 1.99%. If you added another 1%, you would be talking about $70-ish, $75. So that's the way you have to look at this. $75 divided by 12 months. I mean, what are we talking about? So let's have a real conversation here. If the person who is literally going to spend hundreds more because the bus increases or because they have to take an Uber now, like, you know, that cancellation of transit costs people hundreds of dollars. That one cancellation out of one person's mind to cancel transit costs certain people hundreds of dollars. Costs low income places, like places that were have lesser staff that couldn't afford to get to work, where the organizations had to pay for staff to get to work, places where nurses had to get to work. That singular event cost people hundreds of dollars, and yet they didn't think of it, and nobody, even to this day, they say, oh, it was the right thing to do. Even if we all know it was wrong, I would have done it again. But $56 a year, we don't want to do that.
Well, I understand your analogy. I think from a taxpayer's perspective, in some way I agree with what Councillor Francis said. You can't look at things in a bubble. Yeah, it's only $56, but it's $56 there. You have gas prices that are up probably 20%. You have just general inflationary pressures. The problem I have, and I'm not going to sit here and argue with you, is politicians tend to only focus on their specific thing and say, look, it's only $1.20 a week, but it's $1.20 a week there. It's $5 there. It's $4. And by the end of the day, it adds up.
So
because
I'm going to cut you off. I'm going to cut you off on that, because I'm going to tell you this. I'm not some like spendthrift, crazy liberal left wing. In fact,
yes, you are.
Everything that I'm talking about spending is an investment. So when we talk about transit investments, we're spending right now in this capital budget over $500 million on roads. Do we ever talk about the demand side of that? What if we were able to reduce that by 10% because we got more people on a bus? Do we ever have that conversation? No, we don't. Other cities do. We know that you can measure that. We don't have those conversations. So if we put more people on buses through a mode shift, those same people For example, I have 3 kids, 2 of which are old enough to drive now. One of them is going hard to get a license. The other doesn't want to get it. If he wants to get his license and pay for insurance, minimum $150 a month. If I were to give him a great option in transit, he would pay $100 or $80 a month, and he would get all the options he needed. So the issue isn't really, it's not about just, continuing to spend and death by 1,000 cuts where you keep adding. These are investments. And to your point, the capital investments that we keep making with roads and all these other things, if you do things properly, if you invest in core areas, for example, where you're trying to build density, more people will live downtown, more people will live in built up neighborhoods if there's a community center there, if there's a library there. Now, if you added 30% more residents to the core, you would be adding 30% more tax revenue without increasing the cost of services. So, but to do that, you need to invest in things like a community center or a library or those types of things, or transit, so that I can live in the city and not need to own a car. So I take your point, but none of us are talking about willy-nilly spending. All we're talking about are investments that are tied to plans that we have that have outcomes, whether it be climate change outcomes, whether it be reducing our asset management. 1.16% of the 1.99 is an asset management plan. That's literally just taking care of the assets we already have. So we're telling you directly where that money is going. We can do that with transit. We can do that with all kinds of things. And I would love to say we did it with the sewer surcharge. Everything from the sewer surcharge goes into your sewers. So I would love to do it and say 0.5% is for transit, period. So I have no problem telling you where every single penny of those increases will go. And I could also tell you how those will reap benefits and reward, both financial and social, later on.
Yeah, I understand that, but the pushback you're going to get from general taxpayers, just, people who think like me, is I have no problem. I think you should be building more community centers. I think we should be improving transit. I think we do have to deal with the homeless situation and the housing problem. I don't think we need a $25 million thing that covers the stage right now. So right. If you're saying we have to raise taxes because we need community centers, I'm going to look at it and say, you got $25 million to do this. Take the money from that and factor into that. Why are you taking more money from me when we are in an economic situation? Inflation is going up. Costs of just living for taxes and hydro and blah, 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 blah. So again, I understand what you're saying, but you can't look at it in a bubble and say, well, it's only $56, because to a person at the end of the year, it's not. It's probably a few $100s when you factor in all the increases that they've been pushed on from different levels of government. And it becomes a package of the whole package, as opposed to just looking at this one singular thing in a bubble.
I get that. And what I'm saying, though, is that discussion of what you get in return is what the discussion should be, not the
sure,
number.
100%.
So,
yeah.
So if we don't want to invest in new slides at Adventure Bay, then let's have that discussion. And I think where I stand on all the frivolous stuff. I think some stuff is still nice to have. But the frivolous things, and I think I use bright lights all the time as an example. That was $3 million that was brought in. What we don't tell people is that we have over $600,000 of operating costs that are associated with bright lights every year, right? So that one-time $3 million is now perpetually $600 of operating costs, which I think has actually gone up. It might actually be closer to 700. So I agree with you. And I think an Adventure Bay to me is the biggest example, right? We paid for it, which was in the tens of millions of dollars. And then we lose probably $1 to $2 million just on the Adventure Bay side. So I agree with you, but that's the conversation about so I'm going back to the conversation is what services and what's the base level of things you want, not the number. Tell me the services you want and tell me the type of city you want to live in. Don't tell me what that number should be. And that's where I think, I will tell you dollar for dollar where every single one of your dollars is going. And there's going to be times we disagree. But overall, people will see that we're putting it in, for the most part, putting it in larger investments that will reap rewards that also have impacts like reducing, your road maintenance and things like that. So I agree, but I think the conversation should start at the service level, not at the dollar amount.
Well, I love when this happens. Sometimes I feel like the mayor's office is listening to us in real time and calls up the Windsor Star and puts out a story while we are doing the show. Councillor, I'll editorialize right now. There's a Windsor Star article that comes out. Sounds like everything that you've just said specifically regards to transit, increasing taxes where necessary with prudent needs. Sounds like the mayor is calling you irresponsible. He's talking about Transit Windsor, and he's pointing to all the investments that have already been made. And we're going to try to be really quick about this. So I'm really going to just set this up, give you the response, and then we're going to try to take it out. But he says, quote, "There are some on council who have made transit the issue in this budget. And I think people need to realize there's a responsibility to make investments, but also a responsibility to be responsible and prudent with those investments." I like the responsibility to be responsible. He goes on to add, "We have moved forward with the master plan. And with respects to investments, we have made investments." He's really doubling up here. I feel like this was done in real time. He then pointed to bus shelter investments and new buses that are scheduled to arrive, and roughly $750,000 for ongoing implementation of the master plan. He does add, though, it's not an objection to investing in transit. It's an objection about not doing it smartly, ending it saying, this is not the year we can afford to do it. So I want your answer here in real time, your response to what you've just heard here. Very rarely have we had the opportunity to, I take it that you're some on council. So please respond.
This isn't really like new. So, I find it funny because he has the let's meet. I want to meet with all the councillors to learn your budget priorities. And basically he crafts his talking points around prepared to make sure that our priorities are dealt with in his talking points. So, which I take as a compliment, I guess. But
have you met with him yet?
So, oh yeah, we all have. Yeah.
Okay.
He wants to know your priorities so that he knows how to talk down to them in the press. So that's he doesn't actually help you.
Reno is that 43-year-old whiskey dinner thing. Don't you remember that part?
Yeah. So the issue is this. We're last in transit funding. We have been. The shelters that he's talking about were last year in years past. Yes, we installed some this year. We keep talking, we keep re-announcing things. Those capital investments, a huge chunk of that was federal money. Are we enacting our master plan? Our 518X route, that's a huge success to St. Clair College, only got enacted because those same pain in the ass counselors pushed the issue last year and got it passed because it wasn't approved and it wasn't going to be approved last year. So, say what you want, but these are a lot of words to talk about nothing, literally nothing, because there's no service enhancements happening this year. And to say that this isn't the year to do it, it just shows a fundamental lack of understanding of how investment works, right? When the stock market goes down, you buy like hell. And so when gas prices go up and people need rides, you invest in transit. Because now, if you show people that transit is an option, if you show them that your car is costing you $500 a month and you could get a reliable pass for $100 a month and you could switch over and sell that car, you're giving people options and you're giving people money in their pocket. So this is the type of concept. This is the discussion that will always be an ideological difference between the mayor and myself. This is about investing in your community. This is about understanding who those people are that need municipal services, because at the end of the day, this is how you're going to service those people hardest hit by the pandemic. So to use people's plight over the last year to keep continuing to push this tired trope of hold the line on taxes and being prudent and being responsible is tired and tiresome. So at the end of the day, the people who were hardest hit by the pandemic rely on public services, including public transit. And so now is definitely the time to invest in transit, especially when the federal government is matching all our investments. We're going to disagree. Again, if he can have that conversation with a straight face and at the same time support decorative lights and a trolley, we have an homage to a trolley at the riverfront to our past as a public transit leader. And it's a good thing we have that to remind us every day of what we used to have in this community. So if he can support those things and not support this, I don't think I really need to say anything else.
Okay, one last question, Councillor Bortolin, and really appreciate you being so generous with your time tonight. And this I think ties into the political maneuvering and rhetoric that you're talking about. So other municipalities have multi-year budgeting. City of London, I believe, sets a budget for the entire term of council, then makes annual adjustments. Do you think that a multi-year budgeting would depoliticize the budget process a bit and make it more about planning 4 years ahead for what the city services and the city revenue will look like? Or do you think that we would have the same kind of maneuvering either way?
Realistically, you're going to have the maneuvering by the personalities around the table. I think it's a good step. I think multi-year budgeting is good on a few fronts. People can plan, departments can plan, people can expect what they're going to get, but there's always going to be people who go out there and say, you know, we need a zero, or this is irresponsible and whatever. So I think until the personalities around the table change, that type of politicizing it won't. I think the process needs to change. I saw a tweet by Brampton mayor who talked about, you know, for the next 2 weeks we'll be debating the budget. It's like, whoa, that's pretty interesting and novel. You actually have multiple meetings and to discuss the budget, whereas here we do it all in one day after weeks and weeks and weeks of a media parade by the mayor, who goes out and sells it to everybody, to the point where if you're a councillor and you're on the fence, which side of the fence are you going to fall on into? So this is, I mean, it's a broken process that we have. It was a broken process that mandated that they give 10% cuts 6 months ago. It's a broken process where the mayor is the lead on it. They have a press conference. Not one question went to the CAO. The CAO is the one who takes the budget and actually has to pay for things and you know, deliver the services that we're saying are worth that number. And nobody asks him the question. So, and then there's a traveling roadshow. And today it capped off with a media event about what? A media event about nothing, talking about how great we are at transit. And all you have to do is say, what I use 9 tweets today to put it really into context. So at the end of the day, we can try to change the process. We can try to change different things. Until the personalities change, the politicization of it all won't. And this is something that, you know, it will continue to do so. And it'll be like this. I mean, this is the last budget for this term. So, you know, the new council will dive into a budget as soon as they're elected. We'll see, you know, what, if any, new faces are around the table at that time. But it really comes down to the leadership and how that's pushed through. So until we see new personalities and new people around the table, I don't think much is going to change.
What's the rumor mill? You hear anyone running?
I hear too many people running. So
there's
we'll
your answer, folks. What a diplomatic response. You could have said "fuck off, John."
Well, fuck you, John. But that's,
whoa! Someone's gonna have to file an integrity commissioner complaint.
I don't need that question for that.
You're kidding me? That's going to be John's new ringtone tomorrow.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Just bleed it out.
Not upset at all. We are going to move on to our last segment then of the night. Councillor, thank you so much for giving us your full time. We ask you just stay with us for this one. If you've got one that you want to throw in as well, of course, we'd love to have it. But we will start off with Doug for your consideration.
Thanks, John. I just want to call everyone's attention to an event coming up next week. On December 8th, the Windsor Law Center for Cities will be holding a budget town hall. CAO Jason Raynar will be there along with Activate Transit Windsor Essex and the Windsor Essex Youth Climate Council, and multiple other community groups. If you're not able to attend, Rose City Politics will be broadcasting the event. We will have it on our podcast feed afterwards. If you want more information, find out about the event, you can head on over to windsorlawcities.ca and click on the events button. It's right there for your consideration.
You're a lot nicer than me. I say skip that event, listen to Rose City Politics, and then listen to the rebroadcast of it live. Because I mean, I don't know what you're doing chilling for someone else here, Doug. Come on, it's our podcast.
It's a podcast now, man. You can time shift it. People, you can, you know what? Wait till you have vacation at the end of the year and binge all 50 episodes that we did in one weekend.
Do you want a shout out on Rose City Politics like Hannah had at the top of the show? If you can beat Hannah, that means you'll get at 100%. Least 4 shout outs on one more show, because she will not get another shout out from this point. She's stuck at 3. You can do it. Binge us all.
And if you do that, you can tell John to go fuck himself like Reno did.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's free.
And I'll make that my ringtone for a full week. And you can call me during a show. This is how we really get the Patreon flowing. I have a for your consideration. Toll the EC Row Expressway. I've said this before as a joke. I will keep saying it as a joke. But if we're in a perpetual state right now where it's hard to be increasing the funding for our transit system, I think that the most advantageous opportunity for council is to ask the premier to toll the road. We can treat it like the 407, have the municipality, have the corporation of the city of Windsor be the Getty of all of the money, and we can we'll put some capital dollars towards having the cameras that can read the license plates. But let's start charging those freeloaders from out of Windsor who use our expressway, because they don't pay for any of the upkeep. Councillor, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to respond to that one.
I've always loved the idea. We can't, only the provincial government can do so.
Do you support the council?
Politically, I'm not going to say anything more. Yeah, I'm not going to carry this on any further, but like I said, I would love it, but it's not going to happen. So
I got more of an answer out of you than I thought that I would. And that is what you come to Rose City Politics for, folks. You get the hard-hitting questions and sometimes the fuck off, John, answers that lead you to a place that no one quite expected. It is December the 1st. It is the 4th night of Hanukkah. Councillor Bortolin, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. We really dove into the topics there. Really appreciate the perspective that you bring. And we're going to be paying attention, of course, to the budget meeting that's coming up. But we will first be getting to our budget show on the 8th. That's our next week episode. We might be asking you to come in as well, Councillor, again, to give some more perspectives. We're gonna extend the invite to all councillors, and we'll see if we can get a full majority that refuse. That would be par for the course with us on the program, but we do look forward to seeing how that plays out. So, Councillor, thank you for joining us. The regular panel tonight included myself, John Lidke, Doug Sartori, and of course, Don Merrifield Jr. We are in BizX Magazine and at bizxmagazine.com. We are at patreon.com/Rose City Politics on all of your favorite social media and podcasting apps. And Rose City Politics has been able to broadcast live on tape. Thank you to the kind support of Leuna 625, Building Better Communities. We will be back next week, December the 8th, for our budget episode. It is one of our blowouts. After that, we will be doing our councillor report cards. We'll see if Councillor Bortolin wants to be on the show after that one. Who knows? We'll find out on that episode. So thanks for tuning in, folks.